This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue dice, the story ends. You take all your gladiator lancers, desolation marines, and repulsors, and you wake up in your bed believing whatever you want to believe. Or you take the red dice. You stay in Wonderland. You take your death companies, your sanguinary guards, your assault centurions, and I show you just how deep this rabbit hole goes. So welcome to our weekly Blood Angels Tactics video, my friends. Thanks for being here, and let's get straight into it. We're trying to figure out how to build lists, how to play well in 10th edition at 40k. Jump pack troops and heavy armor is a hot topic right now, so I thought I would start with that. Let's talk about some of the reasons that heavy armor is so good. And I've got it all broken down, and I've actually got like some really interesting figures to show you once we actually get into some of the comparison tables. Anyway, what's hot at the moment is the Gladiator Lancer. Everybody knows this. It's got toughness 10, it's got a 3-up save, and it's got 12 wounds. It's got OC3, which is nice as well, but the main reason you take the Lancer is every time you're going to shoot with that Lancer, you're going to get to reroll 1 hit, 1 wound, and 1 damage. And that means you're not going to need to waste your Oath of Moment target, probably. Your Lancer can shoot at something else. That's probably one of the reasons that it's so strong. For 145 points, potentially 18 damage from that gun. It's strength 14 minus 4, 7 to a 2-inch range as well. So literally park it on your table edge or your backfield objective if you can. Get some cover as well. And obviously you don't have to use the reroll on this gun. If you hit every time with this gun and if you wound every time with this gun, then you're all good. But yeah, Lancer, Laser Destroyer seems like it is very, very strong at the moment. A lot of people are running them. 2 attacks, potentially 18 damage. Now let's compare that, I guess, to like a melee unit that can do this, maybe not that can do the same, but is about the same number of points. And Death Company with jump packs coming at 155, so they seem like a good choice, right? So Death Company with 1 jump pack's 155. We know, everyone knows what they are. They're movement 12. They are toughness 4. They've got a 3-up save with a 6-up feel no pain. They've got this new Black Rage rule and the Berserk Fury, which means they're going to reroll their charges for free now, which is pretty cool. And they're also going to reroll all their hits for free now, which is pretty cool. What is not cool is Thunderhammers are basically only weapons go 4 now with 3 attacks, and they're only 2 damage. So most people, I think I would avoid Thunderhammers now. I would go for the Power Fists, which basically just same number of attacks, but you hit on 3s rather than 4s. So you can do 40 damage from 5 guys, because in Sons of Sanguinary, you're going to get +1 attack when you charge. That gives 4 attacks per model. 5 guys in the squad, so that's 20 attacks. So potentially 40 damage at -2, 2 damage from those Power Fists. Your Power Fists will be strength 9 when you make the charge. There is some caveats to Death Company, like we know that they need a chaplain to be able to fall back on objective control, but I'm not looking at that just now. I'm looking at like damage output. That's what I'm wanting to compare. So straight away you see the Death Company can do 40 damage. Well, that's a lot more than the Gladiator Lancer. Yes, the Gladiator Lancer has some other weapons. Yes, the Death Company, if you do take Power Fists, and that's what I recommend, you can actually take 5 Melta Pistols or Infernal Pistols, which is a pistol that does D3 damage, but if you're in 3 inches, which is actually pretty hard to do, you get +2 damage as well for the Melta, so it's minimum 3 to 5 if you're within 3 inches. That's hard to do in a big squad, maybe easier to do in a 5, but in general, it's pretty hard to get all your Melta Pistols in range, even at 6 inches, right? So what we've been seeing is, or at least in the games that I've played, these guys have bounced off the enemies that I've thrown them at. I've thrown them at knights. They didn't do that well. I actually ran them with Thunderhammers a couple of times. I wasn't overly impressed with them. So what I thought I would do is just start breaking down like tons of numbers here. And I'm going to speak through all of it. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll sort of get a feel for how we can improve the damage over melee units and what we should be doing in certain situations to improve the damage. And this is a bit of an eye-opener for me as well, so hopefully it opens the eyes for some of you guys. So if a Death Company are charging, we just said they're strength 9, they're -2, they're damage 2. So if you throw them into a Land Raider, which is toughness 12 and a 2-up save, you are only doing 5.93 damage, right? I say that's pretty poor. For a 155 point unit, I feel like it's pretty poor. If you're throwing them into an Armiger, again, with a 3-up, 5-up save, you're doing 7.9 damage because the toughness is 10. So this is just their melee weapon. The pistol damage is over here. It's 2.5 into the Land Raider if everybody was in range, and it would be 3 basically into the Armiger if everyone's range. I didn't factor in the melta shots, so I guess if you do get a bunch of guys in melta range for the pistol, which is really hard to do, I think. Typically you might have one guy in melta range. Maybe in the odd case you'll have the whole squad, but I feel like that damage is unreliable, because there's a lot of times where, you know, you can make a 6-inch charge, I guess, from like 6.9 inches away or something. If you're 6.9 inches away, then you're firing none of the pistols. So the way I see it is the pistol is bonus damage. I wouldn't rely on it for a first strike, right? Like a first strike would be like you are charging enemy, you're hiding behind a piece of terrain quite far away from them, you're jumping out 12 inches, you're making a charge. If you get to shoot with any of your pistols, I feel like that's a bonus. So this damage into a Land Raider seems kind of terrible. What we've got next to it is what the Laser Destroyer will do into these two targets. Bear in mind the Laser Destroyer was 10 points cheaper, and I haven't talked about any of the other weapons Laser Destroyer has. It's got like rocket pods, it's got stubber, might have something else. I think that's possibly all it has. But in the odd case that you make all your hits and wounds with the Laser Destroyer, you could reroll some of your hits and wounds on the rockets and the stubber, I guess. But we're just looking at the main cannon, because most people are going to sit this thing like at the back of the board, maximum range away, and shoot. So this thing does on average 9.36 damage to the Land Raider. So basically if you had 2 of them, you'd almost guarantee that you could kill a Land Raider at 72 inches. And there's very little danger to your Laser Destroyer there, in that it's sitting on your board edge 70 something inches away from the enemy, assuming you can draw a good line of sight. So your Laser Destroyer is pretty safe. And it's decent against Armigers as well. Again, like 2 of these guys will total an Armiger in one shot. So what I thought I'd start looking at was like, is our Death Company just a bad unit, right? Like, just do they not do enough damage? But so what I sort of looked at first was I took the Death Company's damage plus the pistol damage and added Oath, like Oath a Moment, to this. And what would that actually do? So these guys go from basically almost like 8.5 damage up to like 14 damage. So you basically be able to reroll all your failed wounds in this case, because Death Company already reroll all their failed hits, right? So in this case, you take it from like 8.5 damage up to 14 damage. For the Armiger, you take it from like 11 damage up to 18. So there is quite a lot of value in Oath of Moment, your target. But for me anyway, like when I've been playing the game, I've been reluctant to use Oath on a target that Death Company are attacking. And I think that's because they already have built-in reroll hits. So I feel like maybe I'm wasting half of my Oath of Moment because I'm already rerolling the hits. So, and I guess this was one of the reasons I started building this video, was to like try and make sure that my mindset was clear and that I know the math and I know what I should be doing. So Oath of Moment, even though you already reroll the hits, is actually really valuable. If you think about it, it's actually probably harder to wound stuff like a Land Raider or Armiger, because you wound on 5s, whereas you're hitting on 3s. So the reroll part of the hits, although you technically waste it by oathing those targets, it's actually quite valuable to oath those targets. In this case, it was 11 damage to 18, so it's 7 extra damage, which is probably like 66%. But then what I went down here to do was to like add in, so if we were just going to charge that Land Raider with this Death Company, we're going to use Red Rampage now. Red Rampage is the one that basically gives us +1 to wound when we charge. We are also going to get some lethal hits in here as well, but I haven't factored in the lethals, right? So lethals will buff it up a little bit more. It's spiky, obviously, because you need 6s on the hit rolls, and because you're re-rolling, you might not actually end up with that many 6s. But so if we just add +1 to wound into here, this is what your damage output actually increases by. Now, lethal hits will probably increase it by a bit more, but it's a 50% damage buff if you can Red Rampage like a Death Company charging a Land Raider, or a Death Company charging an Armiger. Bear in mind, there's other ways we can get +1 to wound. One of the ways you can do that is with a Chaplain. A Chaplain will just give an innate +1 to wound. That's kind of their ability. So like Death Company led by a Chaplain, not Lamartas, not Astaroth, just a generic jump Chaplain, are actually going to do 50% more damage than a Death Company not led. If we also put Oath on here, with our +1 to wound, then our damage output actually increases from like 5.93 all the way up to 9.88, which is a 66% increase. Now, what this tells me is like, Oath is actually, Oath is more valuable when your wound roll is worse. When your wound roll is better, Oath becomes less valuable, but it's still valuable, right? Like it's still 10, it's like 16% on the 50, so it's 10-15% more. If you Oath, I've done the math for Oath on pistols. The Oath on pistols will improve it by about 66% damage, and I guess if you read Rampage and Oath, then you get over here where you're doing, if you originally you were doing like 5.9 plus 2, which is like 8.5. Now you're up to 14.5. So this is a cumulative bonus of like 24%. But if you actually work it back all the way to the beginning, we've gone from like 8.5 damage to Land Raider, assuming everybody could shoot their pistol, all the way up to 17.4 damage. Well, 17.4 damage will kill a Land Raider in one shot, right? So a Death Company, 5 guys with Red Rampage and the Oath target, and you're in range of all the pistols, you'll one-shot the Land Raider. Now that actually sounds pretty big. Again, Armiger, the same thing goes. You were at like 7.9 plus 2, so you're at 11 damage. You're all the way up to 22 damage. So again, from the base, it's about 200% damage. So if you actually start breaking that down, it means like if you just use Red Rampage, that only works in melee, you're getting a 50% increase. If you use Oath, you're getting about 66% increase on those pistols. You're getting about 66% increase overall. But if you stack that with the +1 to wound, then the damage, it's all layered, I guess. So basically, you go from like pitiful damage. I would say this is pitiful, like 6 damage into a Land Raider. You've not even bracketed it. They're probably going to mop up all 5 Death Company. 8 damage to an Armiger. Armigers, maybe you've bracketed it. You might not have. Is it 1 to 4 wounds? You might not even bracket the Armiger statistically, or maybe it's right on the tether. But yeah, it's gone from pitiful damage up to quite acceptable, actually quite good damage. But I think the main takeaway that I'm seeing, or the main thing that I'm sort of, having made this slide and spent a lot of time looking at the math, was like, we used to get +1 to wound all the way across the battlefield, right? Every unit that was charging was getting +1 to wound. And that's what made us really good. That's what made Blood Angels be able to punch up into armor, into monsters, into anything really. We could punch up. Whereas now, we're not really punching up, or at least my experience tells me we're not punching up. Like, I've actually seen a bunch of people just flat out drop Sanguinary Guard. I've actually seen a bunch of people just flat out drop Death Company. I dropped both this week because I haven't quite figured out how to play them. And I think, potentially, what we need to be thinking about is, like, how can we get Red Rampage on as many units as possible? Now, it kind of sucks to have to burn all our CP like this, but maybe actually getting Red Rampage is the wrong term. It's how can we get +1 to wound on as many units as possible? So Sanguinary Guard could be attached by a captain who can use Red Rampage for free, potentially, because you can use that activation from, I think it's called Rites of Battle. So that can give you +1 to wound on them. So Death Company can only be led by a chaplain. So I think the interesting thing, I guess, is you want to run Death Company. I think you probably want them led by a chaplain. And as cool as Lamartez is, with the -1 damage and lethal hits, to me now, based on these numbers, it feels like if you were going to take Lamartez, you were going to have to play Red Rampage on him. If you don't play Red Rampage, you don't do enough. But again, Red Rampage is overlapping because Red Rampage gives you lethal hits, which Lamartez gives lethal hits. So, and Lamartez is crazy expensive. Like, a lot of people, I think, will want to run Lamartez plus a 10 Death Company because they see that as really strong. I think the Death Company are probably going to work. For me, the second 10 Death Company are probably going to overkill most things you charge. And I suppose you're going to lose models when you get overwatched as well. It's actually really tricky. I think that's one of the reasons that melee has become so tricky is Overwatch. Like, you bring a big 10-man squad, you probably lose like 3 or 4 of them to Overwatch, and then you're down to like a smaller number, and then you don't know what strats to play. But I guess if you were going to take Lamartez, I think in most situations you're probably going to want to play Red Rampage. You might be better just taking the 5 and the Chaplain. They might not be as juicy an Overwatch target, but maybe that benefits you. The +1 to wound is huge. and I guess you can get an extra bunch of damage from Oath. So what I'm seeing, or at least what I saw when I did this, was like, I was surprised at how much damage the Death Company could still do, based on like having no character support here, right? Like no character support means we can use Oath, we can use Red Rampage. Obviously stacking them together has a bit of diminishing returns, but your damage output coming all the way from like 5 to basically 8.5 all the way to like 17.5. I guess if you factored out if you weren't able to shoot, you could still do like 13 damage to a Land Raider, and that's with no character support, just a 5-man unit. That's actually really decent. Like Land Raiders before, I guess, had a 2-up save. Thunderhammers used to only be -2, so they still could save pretty effectively against them. Obviously, you're using Power Fist now, but it doesn't really change anything. So for me, and I think that's a really awkward thing, right? Because we talk a lot about adding a character to these units. So by the time you spend, well, Lamarta is 135 points. I guess a regular chaplain, I think, is with a jump pack is just 85. And arguably, the 85 point guy might be more attractive in terms of damage output because he just has that built-in +1 to wound. By attaching the chaplain to the Death Company, the chaplain will get to do all their reroll hits as well because they'll get the Black Rage from the Death Company. But yeah, I think that's the really tricky part, is because when you start attaching these characters, then the squads start becoming much more expensive than the armor, whatever you would call it, the armor equivalent, and also when you attach that character, I think internally, at least the way I've been looking at it, is like, oh, I've attached a character, I should make it a 10-man squad because that'll do more damage. But basically, in some ways, I think that hurts you because you probably don't need the 10-man squad. So probably when you kill your enemy, which you potentially here in this kit situation, you could probably do with a 5-man squad. You could probably kill the Land Raider if you oathed it and you charged it with the chaplain. You then just have 5 men out in the open ready to get shot and killed, as opposed to having 10-man. And like when I played Knights, I had like a 10-man Terminator squad and a 10-man -1 damage Death Company squad, both mopped up in like one turn. Like I think at the end of the turn, I think I'd lost all the Death Company and Lamartes. I'd lost maybe 4 of the... I think I had 4 Terminators left and the Terminator Captain. So, you know, like I'd lost like... I was going to say 10 Death Company plus Lamartes, that's like 435 points. Terminators are like 30 points a model and I lost 6 of them. So I'd lost like 700 points of infantry models in 1 round of shooting, which is actually like... You're not really coming back from that if you've lost 700 points in 1 round of shooting. And what's worse is I actually didn't kill a single knight with either of those 2 squads. But my thought behind this was like, I could have probably done more damage into the 1 knight with tactical use of like Red Rampage, I guess. But and then I guess I oathed the knight that was -1 damage. Probably I oathed the knight that was -1 damage because my Terminators were charging it, and Terminators hitting their oath target get +1 to hit, and I thought that would really do a bunch of extra damage. It didn't. So I guess the concern is these guys can be buffed to do a lot more damage. Just the question is, if they don't quite kill what they need to kill, they're going to be pretty exposed and they die pretty quickly. And I think that's probably why a lot of people are mixing in a lot of heavy armor. So I did another comparison here, because, like I said, this surprised me how much damage the Death Company have done. They never did anything like this in the games that I played. I had lethal hits. I don't think I played Red Rampage, potentially. And then in the other game, I think someone made me -1 to hit my Thunderhammers, and I was only hitting on 5s. I think it was Eldar, and it was awful. So that's kind of what swayed me away from Thunderhammers. But I wanted to talk about Sanguinary Guard as well, because they're 215 points for 5 at the moment. They have a Power Fist and Carmite Blade, which on paper, in the Sons of Sanguinius detachment, can do 48 damage at -2 AP. They get -1 to hit and wound in melee, which is cool. But the fact that cut them down doesn't exist and stuff anymore, I feel like it becomes irrelevant, because like people are just going to fall back from the Sanguinary Guard. Like, they have to. Like, why would you stay in combat with Sanguinary Guard if you don't have to? And there's no penalty to falling back. Like, they can't cut you down or anything like that. Obviously, they can surround you, but it's going to be super hard to surround something with 5 Sanguinary Guard. It's not very many models at all, right? And I guess this is another reason that melee units are probably feeling intrinsically weaker, is because you can't go... Well, 7's a really good number for surrounding things, so I'll take 7. You're stuck on 5s or 10s, and 10 makes you susceptible to blast as well. But anyway, on paper here, you see Sanguinary Guard, you think 5 attacks from the 4 Incarnate Blades when we charge. So that's 20... Yeah, that's 20 attacks for 40 damage, and then 4 attacks from a Power Fist, potentially 48. What can do a lot of damage in melee? Because I could have picked another gun unit, and I almost did pick another unit that was a shooting unit, but I thought, let's have something that can tangle, and the thing that we can tangle with is a Brutalis Dreadnought. And honestly, based on feedback I've seen from Marine players, most people think this Brutalis Dreadnought is horrifically overcosted at 220 points. So this is 5 points more than Sanguinary Guard. Like I said, most people think it's horrifically costed. It's got... I mean, I think the way I would run it is probably like the Talons. So you've got the Sweeper, the Strike profile. You've got those nipple-mounted multi-meltas, and you've got like a Icarus heavy stubber or something. What's interesting about the Brutalis is it can do 21 damage in melee, because you'd be Strength 7 from the Sons of Sanguinius. Strength 13, -2, 3 damage a sweep. You obviously have the sweep attacks as well if you really wanted to do 1 damage. Which is cool. I guess it's a little bit more versatile if you're just fighting 1 wound models. But each time this model ends the charge, you roll the d6, and basically it's going to average about 3 mortal wounds. On a 4-up, it's 3 mortal wounds. On a 6, it's d3 plus 3. On a 2 or a 3, it's d3. On a 1, it doesn't do anything, right? So it's probably going to average 3 mortal wounds every time it charges, but... if you did play Tank Shock, you'd be rolling 12 dice minimum, potentially 14 dice every 5 up is a mortal wound. So if you're rolling 14 dice every 5 up is a mortal wound, you're probably adding 5 mortal wounds. I think I've written here that it would average 9 mortal wounds on the charge. It would be 8. Sorry, my bad. So 21 damage, but 8 mortal wounds. So arguably a lot less damage than the Sanguinary Guard. But let's see what happens when we actually start doing some maths, right? And I guess one thing to say about this is Sanguinary Guard could run 5 Infernal Pistols on every model. I mean, you could run Angelus Bolt Guns now, which are pistols. I'm glad they made those pistols, but I think it's irrelevant because, like, Sanguinary Guard are just so expensive. Why would you run them? But yeah, I'm glad that they finally did make those pistols, because it was a bit annoying when you're stuck in melee with a Sanguinary Guard and you couldn't shoot them. But anyway, if you think 5 Infernal Pistols, the Brutalis has a twin-linked multi-melta. The multi-melta is more strength. And obviously a lot more range. So I figure a twin multi-melta is probably equal to 5 Infernal Pistols in terms of damage output. I guess there's the stubber on there as well. So I haven't delved into it, the shooting. I just wanted to look at their melee. I think their shooting is probably... Because you're probably going to be able to shoot the multi-melta a couple more times at longer range, it's probably going to average the same as the 5 Infernal Pistols. Hate me in the comments if you want. That's my 2 cents on this. So we're looking at melee for the Sanguinary Guard charging with like 20 at strength 6 and a 4 at strength 9. The reason that these are +1 strength is, again, the Sons of Sanguinius detachment. You can actually make these +2 strength if you use the Captain. The Captain would make the Sword strength 7 and the Power Fist strength 10, which could actually help you with some breakpoints. We think about the Sanguinary Guard is... I've compared... If you look on the last slide, the Death Company I was using against Armour, right? Like, we're trying to kill Armour with the Death Company. We always were trying to kill Armour, probably, or Armour or monsters with Thunderhammers. Sanguinary Guard, people have always said to me, like, oh, they're not for killing Armour. Sure, they're killing elites. So let's look at some elites now. And here's the thing. Elites have crazy toughness. You've got Beasts in Nurgle with toughness 9. You've got Terminators with toughness 5. You've got Wraithguard with toughness 7. Wraithguard are horrific, by the way. How are these guys just 31 points a model? Toughness 7, 2-up save, 3 wounds, and like a strength 10 gun that'll do horrific damage. Look at, if you want to see the Wraithguard are 12 points per model cheaper than Sanguinary Guard. I mean, they eat them for breakfast, I feel like, but that's where we are right now. I'm not going to get too bitter about the state of Sanguinary Guard. I'm actually doing this to see if Sanguinary Guard are any good, right? So this is the damage Sanguinary Guard will do against each of these units. A 5-man squad of Sanguinary Guard, again, no character buffs. So just, if we took them as cheap as we could do, which is 215 points, they will just kill a Beast of Nurgle. Because Beast of Nurgle have 7 wounds and they regenerate fully. So if you're down a single guy, you aren't killing that Beast of Nurgle, so there's no point even charging it. Because it'll just regenerate. Terminators, with the 2 up, 4 up, we're going to kill 3 Terminators with Sanguinary Guard. That doesn't sound too bad. I guess the Strength 6 helps a lot. And against Wraith Guard, we're only going to kill 2 of them. So if you charge a 10-man Wraith Guard squad, you're going to kill 2 of them, and then their special ability is going to let them shoot 8 melta-guns into your face. So basically, if you charge Wraith Guard with Sanguinary Guard, expect to kill 2 out of the 10-man squad and then lose all 5 of your guys. Like, it's madness. It's absolute madness. So what would happen here if we put some Red Rampage on? Well, Red Rampage is going to help a bit. Again, you know, there's no point playing it into the Beast of Nurgle unless you want to guarantee killing that one beast. We're going to kill basically 1 extra Terminator. So I guess, like, if you think 1 CP is worth killing 1 extra Terminator, go for it. And against Wraith Guard, we're not even going to kill 1 more Wraith Guard. 1 CP is not even going to help us kill 1 more Wraith Guard. And this is why I was saying it might be value. In this case, you know, these 20 attacks at Strength 6 against the Wraith Guard are only wounding on 5s. If you had a Captain attached, and this is why I probably prefer the Captain to Dante, if you had the Captain attached, then those 20 attacks are now wounding on 4s rather than 5s. I get Dante's +1 to hit, but I think, for me personally, I feel like you're better having +1 to wound and then oathing, as opposed to +1 to hit than oathing. Because it's like, if you're hitting on 2s and wounding on 5s, but you're rerolling everything, you can still kind of suck and not get that many 5s through. Whereas if you're hitting on 3s and wounding on 4s, which is what the Captain could give you, and bear in mind the Captain can also give you that free Red Rampage, you could suddenly be hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s. So the best you can do with Dante is hitting on 2s, wounding on 4s. The Captain will let you hit on 3s and wound on 3s, and you wouldn't have to pay any CP. And this is kind of why I'm like confused. Is Dante got this awesome new model? My opinion of his rules is he is not awesome. Like, just make your Captain your Warlord so that the Sanguinary Guard get the -1 to hit and the -1 to wound in melee combat. However, that doesn't help them against Wraith Guard, of course, because they just shoot them with their guns and it doesn't count as melee. So anyway, Wraith Guard are going to be like a Enigma unit for Blood Angels. I don't really know. I had to use 2 squads of guys to kill them, and I'd commit so much to kill them. And I lost the game so hard, it was ridiculous. Anyway, the Red Rampage into the Wraith Guard, you're not even going to get 1 more model kill. Okay. If we look at the basic from the Brutalis with no tank shock, you know, just the Brutalis rolling that d6, doing the 3 mortal wounds. The Brutalis will do more damage against the Beast of Nurgle. The Brutalis will do more damage against the Terminators, albeit not by much. And the Brutalis will kill a whole extra Wraith Guard. I'm not sure the Brutalis has much chance of surviving against the Wraith Guard firing back either, but he does have toughness 10, and I think their Melta might be toughness strength 10 actually. So maybe if they roll poor, he might be able to live, but I feel like it's probably a pretty low percentage. So I never worked out Oath for the sorry, not Oath. I never worked out Red Rampage for the Brutalis. There didn't seem that much point because remember the Brutalis's claws are twin linked. So with a strength 13, he was going to basically wound all these things on 3s. Except the Terminators, which you'll wound on 2s, and then he's going to re-roll everything. So it didn't seem like there was much value in playing Red Rampage when you're already re-rolling all your wounds and you're already wounding on 2s or 3s. And I guess that's kind of why I'm doing this video, is to try and make it clear when different strats should be played. So the Sanguinary Guard bonus against elites from Red Rampage actually seems pretty poor, right? Like, what you probably need is you probably need the Captain to attach so that we're like, well, against the Wraith Blade, strength 7, I guess that means no difference against the Terminators or Beasts and Nurgle. So like Sanguinary Guard are just not very good at killing Terminators or Beasts and Nurgle, I guess. You could put Oath, and if you do Oath against the Beast and Nurgle, then look at the damage increase that this is here, right? Like Sanguinary Guard become crazy, I guess, against Beast and Nurgle if you do Oath. They become very good. We kill basically 3 more Terminators, and against Wraithguard we double it. So if we play Oath and Red Rampage, then that's when Sanguinary Guard are flying way into their own, right? Like Beast and Nurgle, not that you can run squads of 3 anymore, but we would be able to kill 3. I suppose if they were running like 2 Beasts and Horticulus, I think is the big slug that can go with them. He's toughness 10. I guess you could do like a bunch of damage to him, maybe slightly less because he's got a better save. But regardless, against a squad of Terminators, you could blast through, I guess, like almost 0.3 shy of killing 8 Terminators. You do have some guns, so maybe if you got like a couple of damage with those guns, yes, you could kill 8 out of 10 Terminators. And against Wraithguard, you could kill half the squad. I mean, the Wraithguard are just too damn cheap. Why? They should be... If Sanguinary Guard are 43 points per model, these guys should be 43. I think they're better. Honestly, I think they're better. I don't know why they're 31 per model. They're so survivable, it's ridiculous. That toughness 7, man, on an elite like that is just insane. Anyway, the question though is Oath plus Red Rampage versus the Brutalis using the Tank Shock. So the Brutalis, you can pay that 1 CP and you can do the Tank Shock, which means you probably do 6 mortal wounds against most targets, or 5 mortal wounds against most targets, sorry, when you charge them. And that would take the Brutalis's damage way up, right? Like 17.3, 16.8, and 15.2. If you compare that to the Oath of Moment, then it's arguably... It's better against the Wraithguard and Beast and worse against the Terminators. So, if we're thinking about... Like, I do want to run some Sanguinary Guard. I do. I don't know if I want to run them at 215 points per model, but like, or per 5, but I think I do want to run them. I think they get a lot of benefit out of the Captain, but then the second you add a Captain, that's now up to 315 points. And these guys are glass cannons, and we're going to come to that in a second and just say how easy it is for them to kill. But like, I guess in a situation where, like, for example, I don't think we can run... Well, we can't run 3 squads of Sanguinary Guard. We can't run 3 squads of Death Company. I mean, if you were making that work, more power to you. I think you're going to come unstuck into some armies for sure, trying that. So I think you're going to have to mix in some of that armor, and we've seen a lot of people do that with like Gladiator Lancers. I don't recommend the Brutalis at the moment, because I do think... I don't recommend the Redemptor either. I do think both the Brutalis and the Redemptor are like 30 or 40 points higher than they need to be. I don't get why they're so expensive, because they die so friggin' fast. As you know, I'm complaining how fast Dreadnoughts die. They said that this edition was less killy and less mortal wounds. It's the exact opposite, honestly. Everything just dies. But I mean, I haven't had a good track record. I've played Knights twice, I've played Guard once, I've played Aldari once. All these armies just kill indiscriminately, it feels like. But yeah, so if you're in a situation where basically, like, you're only going to be able to use Red Rampage so many times in a turn, you can't attach a Chaplain to the Sanguinary Guard, you can only attach a Captain or Dante. I have to check that, actually. You might be able to... Do you know what? I think the Sanguinary Guard say something... I think it's just a Captain. I'm going to check. Sorry, 1 second. It's hard to remember all the attachments. I'll get there. So Sanguinary Guard can be attached to just the Captain. So Dante and the Captain, that's literally all that can attach to them. Yeah, so you'd want to attach some Chaplains to your Death Company, because that's the best thing you can attach to them. A Captain to some Sanguinary Guard, and then it's all about getting Red Rampages in the correct place. It's all about picking your Oath target. You can see just how much damage. Oath looks like it's better for Sanguinary Guard. I guess it's possibly better. I haven't done Sanguinary Guard against Armour, but like, if you're strength 6 into toughness 12, I wouldn't use Oath on that target, because you're not doing much damage anyway. So picking your Oath target correctly is really important. I guess you need to think about that, like, I think what I was saying was like, I think the Dante versus Captain is a good example where it's like Dante would be hitting on 2s, wounding on 5s. The Captain could be hitting on 3s, wounding on 4s. My thought is with an oath target, you would get more reliability out of the 3s and the 4s than the 2s and the 5s. Because you have to think about your worst roll, and the worst roll is when you're trying to get 5s and 6s. If you only have like 10 attacks through, sometimes you can easily roll 10 dice, you get no 5s and 6s. Well, cool, you got full rerolls, but sometimes you could do your full rerolls, you've only got 3 5-ups. So out of 10 wound rolls with full rerolls, because you only wound on 5s, you only make like 3 wounds. So I think you can get more value off Oath based on if your actual value to hit or wound is a little bit better. But yeah, if you're looking to bring like something else that doesn't necessarily need Oath, then if the Brutalis Dreadnought goes down 40 points, I could see value in Brutalises. There's definitely a lot of value in Tank Shock when you have a Strength 12 weapon, which means when you charge anything, you're rolling at least 12 dice, and if your strength is higher than their toughness, which most of the time it's going to be, because let's face it, Strength 12 is going to beat most toughnesses, then you're getting 2 extra dice. You're rolling 14 dice. Every 5-up is immortal. So, yeah, I mean, the takeaway for me was like, Sanguinary Guard can get their damage buffed a lot. Like, it is a real high amount. But I think the problem with them is probably they're too expensive and there's no customization on the size of squad, which means you get stuck in this awkward position where you either need to take 5 or 10, and 5 are probably not, if you run 5 into Terminators and you use Oath, and maybe in that situation you don't have the CP for Red Rampage, because if you're going to spend CP on Red Rampage every turn, you're going to need other things like Smokescreen, Counteroffensive, Rapid Ingress, I don't know what else. You might not be able to afford to spend Red Rampage every turn. So if you've only got Oath, and you're only able to kill like 4 of 6 Wraithguard or 6 of 10 Terminators, then you're going to get a ton of damage back, and you're probably going to lose most of those models. Whereas if you'd had a 7-man squad, like a 7-man might have been... 7-man always was the ideal for Sanguinary Guard, and I think that's possibly hurt them just as much, if not more, than the removal of +1 to wound. I think a bunch of people ran 8s as well, and if we ever get the option to run 7s or 8s, I'm going to say that's what you want over 5s and 10s, 100%. But when you start attaching these characters as well, and they start pushing up in points, then it becomes really interesting to say, like, is the armor not just better because the armor isn't in these odd sizes, doesn't need the character support, it can just do its own thing on its own? And I guess that's why a lot of people are starting to include a lot more armor in their lists, right? I also just wanted to throw in here a little slide about survivability and try and work out why further reasoning why people want armor, right? So like here's everything that we've talked about so far: the Lancer, the Brutalis, the Death Company, and the Sanguinary Guard. And I put in the Battle Cannon, a Strength 10 weapon, because Strength 10 is actually the breakpoint for these two things. So I wanted something that the Gladiator Lancer and the Brutalis were weaker against. Like, I genuinely wanted that. So if you do like the Lancer against the Death Company, then even against the Strength 10 weapon, it's like 50% more survivable. Against the Strength 9 weapon, it's like over 100% more survivable. Against the Strength 7 weapon, it's basically almost 100%. And against something like a Smite, again, it's 100%. So when we talked about damage earlier, without loads of buffs and character attachments and stuff, the Gladiator Lancer's damage was pretty good. Well, it's 50% more survivable than those Death Company, even with their Feel No Pains. And I mean, I've not even talked about, like, it's very easy to get cover on these tanks as well. You just need to obscure like 1% of the tank now behind a building or a wall or something. You can get cover, so you could ignore 1 point of AP as well, which would further improve these things. Whereas, like, it's going to be very difficult to get cover on your Death Company or Sanguinary Guard because they're probably going to kill a unit that's out in the open potentially, and then be stuck out in the open. Because you can't even use consolidation moves now if you can't get onto an objective or end in engagement range of another model. And that was something that we could use very tactically before, where we could basically like pile in, fight, and then consolidate some guys into cover. Well, you might not be able to do that now. So talking about Brutalis against the Sanguinary Guard, again, similar pointed models against the Strength 10 cannon. Brutalis isn't quite 100% more survivable, but it's like 75. Against the Strength 9 cannon, it's way over 100%. It's like 250. Against the Strength 7, it's again 250. And against the Smite, it's 230% or something. So while these armor units, they might be a little bit behind on damage, a little bit. They're miles ahead of survivability, and I guess you would expect that. But I think the other thing to say is, like, a Gladiator Lancer doesn't need any CP spent on it, right? Like, if you've got 3 Lancers, they're just going to do whatever it was, 9 damage a turn to a Land Raider. They're not going to need any CP spent on them. Maybe you want to smoke screen one of them or something at some point. Same with the Brutalis. I guess the Brutalis might need 1 CP for a tank shock or something, but for the most part, Brutalis maybe doesn't even need that. Being it that, like, if it does end up in melee combat, unless the enemy are punching really damn hard at strength 10, because if it's less than strength 10, they're only wounding them on 5. Excuse me. So that's an interesting thing. A lot of people say the Brutalis is horrifically overcosted. Me included. I think it's way too expensive to run. I've run it once. I run one Redemptor once. I don't like them. I think they're too expensive. Arguably, Sanguinary Guard are... I don't know. I saw Auspex Tactics did a video today saying Sanguinary Guard are in the top 10 worst units of 10th edition. I'm not sure I think they're the worst unit. They can do a bunch of damage, but their defensive stats are bad. Yes, they're -1 to wound in melee. Yes, they're -1 to... Sorry, they're -1 to hit in melee. They're -1 to wound in melee if they're attached to your Warlord. I don't know why anyone would just not fall back from them if that's the case and just shoot them with something else, because everyone's bringing enough guns now. People have realized already that melee isn't that strong, so they're just going to fall back and shoot them. And here's the kicker, right? If you actually do fall back and shoot these guys, right? I think last edition we can agree Death Company do not survive. They never survive. Anytime you send 5 Death Company in as a missile to kill a unit, yes, they might kill the unit, but they're never alive in the next turn. Like, literally never. I think maybe one time at a GT, one time. Like, I went to a lot of GTs in 9th edition. I think one time, so that's probably out of like 50 games, I had maybe one guy in 1 wound. It was like, so out of the 5-man squad, for some reason, I think I'd managed to consolidate them into a piece of cover, and he didn't have great line of sight on them. So one time out of 50 games of Death Company, maybe not 50, but a lot, I had a Marine and a half, 3 wounds left out of the 10 in the unit. Every other time, all 5 Death Company get wiped. Now, when you actually compare Sanguinary Guard to Death Company here, the survivability between the two of them is actually tiny, right? In terms of ranged, if you're shooting these guys with ranged weapons, Sanguinary Guard are like 10% more survivable than Death Company. Against, like, plasmas, it's not even 10%, right? Oh, it is just 10%. And against smites, it's just 10%. Maybe in these two cases against -1 AP. We know they're quite good against -1 AP because they got the 2-up save. It's maybe like 20%. But in shooting, the Sanguinary Guard have no they have survivability, sure. But like in comparison, it just feels like this battle cannon on a night gets like 18 shots. So you're telling me, like, this is one gun on a night of many guns. It can just wipe out 215 points of Sanguinary Guard with one gun. Even an Armiger, right? Like, how many shots does an Armiger get these days? So an Armiger actually has 2 Armiger autocannons. So it gets 8 shots. So basically, like, an Armiger, which is 140 points, is probably going to be able to kill, like, it'll be 8 shots hitting on 3s, so 6 get through. If it's going to take 14 shots to kill all 5 Sanguinary Guard, like, an Armiger is potentially killing, like, a couple of Sanguinary Guard. So if the enemy have 2 Armigers, which is not even a lot, like, you can run, like, 10 Armigers in a big night. Armiger's only 140 points. So you're telling me, like, 2 Armigers can kill 5 Sanguinary Guard, give or take. 2 Armigers can kill 5 Death Company, right? So if they do that, they still have 6 more Armigers. So if every 2 Armigers can kill that many... You could lose 1,000 points of Sanguinary Guard to Armiger fire in 1 turn. Not over the game, in 1 turn. Well, that's game over. If you lose 1,000 points of Sanguinary Guard in 1 turn, it's game over. I mean, arguably if you lose 500 points to Sanguinary Guard, you're on a giant uphill battle for the rest of the game. So yeah, I don't know. I've said this before. I don't know how you're supposed to run Sanguinary Guard in the current edition. I guess you're not. I'm going to make a video on Assault Marines soon. They're very good. I'm surprised I actually haven't made that video yet. I'll get on it. Probably spent too much time messing around doing my Matrix intro this week. I hope you liked that. Please leave a like on this video if you did. Anyway, here's some sort of conclusion to all this. I know this has been a long video, so try and stay with me. Infantry are insanely squishy now. Or at least it feels like there's a ton of weapons that's just going to chew right through them. What I might have been wrong about is the potential that Death Company and Sanguinary Guard have to do damage. Combined with Oath and Red Rampage, squads can do decent damage. But without the 2 buffs, their damage output sucks. So I think the reroll hits for the Death Company is kind of a trap. Because you think, oh, reroll hits, that's quite good, but you actually need reroll wounds the second you go into anything tough anyway. And you need Red Rampage, so just be aware of that. It also means the old way of wanting to charge into multiple combats across the board is highly risky. And one point I just remembered there, when you were getting shot on those Sanguinary Guard with those -1 weapons, right, you're going to want to use Armour of Contempt. If you start blowing all your Armour of Contempts to try and keep Sanguinary Guard alive, then you're going to have no CP to do Red Rampage. So then it becomes even more tricky. Simply having the +1 to wound on the Death Company increases their damage by about 50%, and it increases the Sanguinary Guard damage by 25 to 45%. Bear in mind, all my numbers here were run against what they're supposed to be attacking. So Death Company against Armour, or monsters, I guess, and Sanguinary Guard against elites. So ensuring chaplains, Red Rampage, or captains for the free activation of Red Rampage per turn is going to be potentially make these units a lot more viable. But it does also push their points costs up, and it does also make it extremely difficult to know how many models to put in a squad, be it 5 or 10, right? My next point, they're extremely likely to be mopped up in the current meta. While the Death Company might be playable at 31 points per model, Sanguinary Guard are barely 10% more survivable in shooting. They've got no moral boon protection, and they're 40% more expensive. So just be aware of that when you're trying to build your lists. I think that's really interesting. I think most decent opponents would just fall back and kill them with another shooting unit. It's a no-brainer to me. You're not going to want to stay in combat with them. There's almost no advantage to staying in combat with them now. There's no cut them down, so why would you not just fall back? The only time that's going to maybe help, I suppose, is if you manage to battle shock them. But I don't think you should run Dante, because I don't think his buff for combat is very good. And I think probably even a good opponent would just fall back anyway, take the desperate breakout, maybe lose a couple of models and then mop up the Sanguinary Guard. I think that's still the best play for them. So yeah, I'm not convinced about Dante's rules, I'm afraid. Some people have speculated now you want 1,000 points of armor in your Blood Angels list. I think that might be a minimum. If you don't have 1,000 points of armor, you need 1,000 points of armor. Probably not Dreadnoughts at the moment, even though we talked about that Dreadnought. Probably not Dreadnought. Gladiator Lancers, potentially Predators, potentially Vindicators. Some people have started trying Repulsors or Executioners. Time to break out some tanks, guys. If you don't have some tanks, I would recommend you start by looking at some Gladiators. Gladiators can actually have all 3 variants made from the one kit with very little work. Couple of magnets, a couple of places you just don't put glue and you can change the main turret and stuff like that. So I would definitely look at Gladiators. Armour also doesn't need to have all these buffs slapped on it. They aren't susceptible to blast, and they don't need the character support. So I think that's the main thing that's pushing people to Armour, right? Because infantry are better. We talked about Sanguinary Guard not doing well against those toughness 7 Wraith blades. But if they had a captain attached, then they'd be strength 7. You could use Red Rampage, and you could basically have hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, full rerolls, and then they could actually be really good. But that needs a character, it needs your oath target, it needs some buffs, and I guess that's why some people are really falling on the Gladiator Lancer, because it's got rerolls built into its main cannon. I did actually try the Eradicators last week, because they've got rerolls to hit and wound and damage, but I think they kind of suck because they only wound on 5s, and as far as I'm aware, there's no way to improve that. So when you're shooting armor, you're always wounding on 5s, and like I said, even though you've got full rerolls, it just feels like 5s is not good enough with full rerolls to get that weight of fire and actually kill things. So leave me a comment if there's something you think I could dig into more that might help you out more with your Blood Angels. And if you are new here, or you would like to support me in any way, shape or form, then you could consider hitting that like button. Remember to subscribe. I do tactics videos and discussions like this every week. And the best way you can support the channel, though, is you can drop me a couple of bucks, like the price of a cup of coffee on Patreon. I think the cheapest tier is $2.50, or support me here underneath the video by clicking the join button on YouTube. I think that's like $3.99 a month. I really do appreciate it. It really helps me get this content out on a regular basis. Thank you very much for watching to the end. I hope I'll catch you on one of the live streams or one of my next videos. And I'd love to hear your comments. Look at that sexy gladiator up here. Yeah, on my one, I just flipped out the turret. Just take the turret off, pull the bottom off, put the new weapon in. Job's a good one. Yeah, look, I love these little decals, don't you? All right, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Do you know what? Maybe I should have put my specs on. The Matrix has you. Peace.